I'm super happy to see all of you. I'm so happy you came out tonight. For those of you watching on Zoom, I'm so happy that you decided to log in. Tonight we have a phenomenal speaker that I've probably exhausted many of you talking about. I'm going to do a brief introduction and then I'm going to let him take us away. Is that okay with you all? Awesome. All right, so our speaker tonight is Matthew Dix. He is the internationally best-selling author of the novels Memoirs of an Imaginary Friend, Something Missing and Unexpectedly, Milo, The Perfect Comeback of Caroline Jacobs, 21 Truths About Love, The Other Mother, and the nonfiction title Storyworthy, Engage, Teach, Persuade, Change Your Life Through the Art of Storytelling. His novels have been translated into more than 25 languages worldwide. He is also the author of the rock opera, The Clowns, and musicals Caught in the Middle, Sticks and Stones, and Summertime. He is an advice columnist for Slate Magazine and the humor columnist for Seasons Magazine. He has written comic books for Double Take Comics. I promised him that I would not read this entire bio for him, so I'm going to tell you some of the things that I've learned about Matthew in the time that I've spent with him. Matthew is extremely talented in connecting with people. He has a way of defining life from the perspective that people don't always plan on having it be defined from, right? Like when we start talking about general experiences in life, from homelessness, from being able to stand up in front of thousands of people and tell a story that makes people feel moved. He can do that. So without further ado, I want Matthew to come up here and do what he does best and tell us how to storytell. Welcome, Matthew.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you. All right. It's not heavy. It's nice to see you all. I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about storytelling. I'm going to give you some ideas on why I think you should be doing it and some ideas on maybe how you could do it. And I'm going to start with a story. I'll tell you a couple over the course of the next hour or so. So I hope you enjoy. I can't even remember how my stories began. It's always the worst part for me. I'm staring at a pile of leaves in the back of my school. It's recess, and from the leaves come a hand. A hand emerges from the leaves. It's my student, Jamie. He's a 5th grader. He shouts, "Look what I found!" And I look at his hand, and there's something metallic in his hand. And I say, "What is it?" And he goes, "It's a spoon!" And he's right. It's a spoon. It is an average kitchen spoon, probably lost from some kid's lunchbox yesterday or 5,000 years ago. They're all over the playground. So he's found one in the leaves, and he says, "Can you believe it?" And I said, "Jamie, that is not just any spoon. That is a spoon of power." And Jamie looks at me, and I look at Jamie, and Jamie knows what I'm thinking, because now that I've declared it the spoon of power, I must have the spoon of power. And somehow Jamie knows this because he runs wisely, because I am going to chase this boy down and get that spoon. So for the next 17 minutes, where I'm supposed to be paying attention to children and monitoring behavior and making sure everyone's playing nicely, I instead hunt down a 10-year-old boy. We run across the field. He goes through tubes. I climb through tubes with him. We go down slides together. We jump over swings. And 17 minutes later, he still has the damn spoon. I have been defeated by a 10-year-old who is about half my size. But it's okay, because Jamie's in my class. We still have 2 hours left in the school day, and I know that 5th grade boys have the attention span of about 2 inches. So by the time we get in and he settles down, he's eventually going to forget that he's supposed to be protecting the spoon, and at that moment, I am going to get that thing from him. And he's a fool, because when he comes into class, it's math time, and he puts the spoon on his desk as if he's taunting me. And so I'm doing an equation on the board and keeping one eye on the spoon, and he's writing down an equation in his notebook and keeping one eye on the spoon. And the whole time we're just sort of staring at the spoon instead of doing what we're supposed to be doing. And then it's time for read aloud. I sit on a stool in the front of the class, I open a book, I start reading it, I'm keeping an eye on the spoon, Jamie is listening, he's keeping an eye on the spoon. I'm like, this is not going to last, he's 10. It will fade and I will get the spoon. And then it happens. It's writing time. And Jamie's opened a journal and he started writing. And I stand at the back of the room and I just wait. And I can see how he slowly puts his head down on his arm and he's writing and he's gotten lost in the story, and that is when I move. I come up the center aisle very quietly, very carefully. I come over to Jamie, and I reach over to the other side, and the spoon is gone. And he turns around and he says, "Did you really think I was going to leave it there?" And I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" So I turn to the kid next to Jamie and I say, "Where's the spoon?" And the kid says, "I don't know what you're talking about." And I turn to the girl and I say, "Where's the spoon?" She says, "I don't know what you're talking about." I threaten extra homework. "Tell me where the spoon is, or I'm going to give you 100 years of homework." They're like, "We don't know what you're talking about. What spoon are you talking about?" And then the bell rings. I can't believe it. And Jamie gets up and he puts his chair on top of his desk and he heads over to his locker, and I'm watching and I'm thinking, "What, you did it? Where's the spoon? How could this happen?" And his bus is called. It's bus 8. He gets the bus called and he goes over to the door, and my library of books is over by the door. And when he gets there, he pulls out the S box of books. And from the S box, he pulls out the spoon and says, "I filed under S," and he's out the door. A 10-year-old boy has defeated me, and I cannot believe it. I'm never going to see that damn spoon again. The next day, Jamie comes into class, and he has the spoon. It's around his neck on a chain. And I say, "How did you?" And he said, "My mom had the chain and my dad had the drill. And now he's chained himself with the spoon." And I can't get it from him now, because even being the bad teacher that I am, I know I can't rip a spoon from a chain from a 5th grader. So now he's just walking around the school, flaunting the spoon at all times. Kids ask him, "Why do you have a spoon?" And he says, "Because it makes Mr. Dix angry." And then, a couple of days later, it's time for the math test. And Mackenzie begins losing her mind, because this is what Mackenzie does whenever she has to take a math test. She's a really great math student who gets upset when she gets a 99.5, and there's a danger of not being perfect, and so she starts to get all panicked and worried. And Jamie stands up and walks over to Mackenzie, and he takes the spoon off his neck and puts it on Mackenzie's neck and says, "This will help calm you down." And it does. I have spent the entire year trying to get Mackenzie to calm down over a math test, and this spoon has done it for me. About a week later, David's grandmother dies, and he's out of school for 3 days. And when David returns on the 3rd day, Jamie is by the door with the spoon, and he drops it over David's neck and says, "This will get you through the day." And it does. Throughout the rest of the school year, every time a kid is bullied on the playground, every time a kid is freaking out about a test, every time a kid is in trouble for some bad decision that they've made, the spoon comes off Jamie's neck and it's placed on another kid's neck, and it makes the day better. On the very last day of school, I open up the floor to my students so that they can speak. I teach 5th grade. It's the last year of elementary school. It's the last time they're going to be together before they all go off to different middle schools and maybe never see each other again. And so I like to give them time to chat. And so I say, "Does anyone have anything they'd like to talk about?" And they do. And then eventually Jamie rises from the very back of the room, and he walks to the front of the room, and he takes the spoon off his neck and he hands it to me. And I say, "No, Jamie, I tried to get that spoon and you kept it from me. That spoon is yours." And he says, "No." He says, "The magic of the spoon only works in this classroom." And so he pulls a chair up alongside me, and he stands up on the chair, and he puts the spoon around my neck. And he tells me that when kids need help, it's my job now to put the spoon around their neck so they can get through their day. This last school year was the hardest year I've ever had in my career with the pandemic. We were in class every single day, masked and afraid, and I have never needed that spoon more than last year. It was also the best year of teaching that I have ever done, and truly, a big part of it was that spoon. Somehow a little boy named Jamie, who's now a grown man, found a spoon in a playground one day, and he infused it with magic, legitimate, honest to goodness magic that makes kids' days brighter every time I take it out. And as I taught through the pandemic last year, I often thought how of all the teachers in this country who were fighting to get their kids through a productive year, I was the luckiest of all of them. Because I was the only one who had a spoon that could make a day better for every kid in my class when I needed it. There was not a day that went by that I did not thank Jamie Calvert for the gift that he gave me that day. Thank you. And I have it. So there's a spoon. I like that story. It's kind of new. I just started telling it this last year. I like that story when I talk about storytelling because I like what it does for this spoon, really. Jamie gave me this spoon 12 years ago, and Jamie put the magic in the spoon. But the magic only exists because I tell you a story about it. I've told this story to audiences, maybe a dozen audiences so far, and when I finish speaking, people come up and they want to touch the spoon. They do. You might want to touch the spoon. It's just a kitchen spoon that was left on a playground one day. But because I told you a story about it, you genuinely see it as something different. And because I tell my students every year within the first week of school the story of Jamie and the spoon, that is what gives it the magic that works again and again and again. Jamie was instrumental in finding the spoon and putting the magic in the first place, but without a story, it's just a kitchen spoon. That's what I love about storytelling. That is why I think you all need to be storytellers. I think the beauty of storytelling, the willingness to share of ourselves in a vulnerable and meaningful and entertaining way, is that we can bring enormous power to things as simple as a spoon. And I also think it can do a lot of other things for us. I want you to tell stories because I'm actually a fundamentally unlikable human being who my wife says tells a good story and therefore becomes likable. And that's pretty true. If she was here right now, she'd be sitting over there and she'd be nodding because it is true. I stand on stages all over the country and I speak to audiences of 20 or 200 or 2,000. And I tell stories about my life. Genuine stories like the one I just told. Stories that are vulnerable and honest and authentic and possibly entertaining and sometimes funny. And what happens to me is I walk downstairs just like these right here at the end of my performance. And I am usually about 2 steps away when I'm accosted by someone. Someone who has heard a story that I have told, and now for some reason, a reason I still quite don't understand, they must now tell me a story. And the stories that I get told when I step off this stage are always stories that I can't believe people are telling me. They are remarkable stories about secrets that people have been carrying for all of their lives that they now suddenly feel they need to tell me. Even though the stories that I've just told on the stage have nothing to do with their secret whatsoever, it's the fact that I've opened my heart and I've opened my mind that they have decided to share with me. I was in a high school in Attleboro a couple years before the pandemic, I guess. And I was doing this. I was telling stories to high school kids, telling them about the power of storytelling, telling them lots of things about my life. And when I stepped off the stage and I started talking to some of the kids, a boy came up to me, a 16-year-old boy, and he sort of just waved at me to pull me aside. And so I took 2 steps aside, and he whispered in my ear. He said, "When I go in the bathroom, I have to pee in the corner. I can't pee in the urinal." And then he ran up the aisle. Now, I was standing next to the school psychologist at the time, so I told her, "Who's that?" And she told me who he was. And I said, "You're going to need to talk to him." I've been teaching for 23 years. As strange as it sounds, that's actually a problem that some boys have. For some reason, their brain does not allow them to pee in a urinal, and therefore they pee on the floor. And this boy is 16 years old. He's been doing it all his life, and he's decided that me, a stranger who came to his school one day, and told a few stories was the person that he felt safest with. Just prior to the pandemic, I was in New York City and I told a story at a Moth Story Slam, a competition in New York. And I stepped off the stage and a woman came up to me and she grabbed me. People touch me all the time. You tell stories that are vulnerable and authentic and people just feel that they are entitled to touch you. And so she grabs me and she pulls me aside and she says to me, without even introducing herself, she says, every time I go into someone's house, even my own mother's house, I have to steal something. And then she pulls me in really close and whisper yells at me. She says, I've never told anyone that before. Now, this woman was legitimately suffering from a mental illness. She was about 40 years old. She waited 40 years to tell someone her secret, and she chose a stranger who she had seen tell a story on the stage. This happens to me all the time. As an elementary school teacher, I tell stories to my students all the time. The first story I tell every single year on the very first day of school is about a pool party I went to after the last year of my elementary school career. I went to a girl's house, the whole class was gathered. I got on the diving board, and I went off the diving board into the pool, having not tied my bathing suit on. And when I hit the water, you know what happened. I left the bathing suit behind. And so I was swimming in a pool, entirely naked in front of my class. Now, a few years ago, a father actually called me and said, why are you telling my daughter stories about you naked in swimming pools? Which is a legitimate question. What I explained to him was that the kids I teach are 10. They're all starting puberty. Kids at this age encounter a lot of unfortunate situations, a lot of embarrassing and even shameful situations. I want them to know on the first day of school that I'm willing to share my shame with them so that they're willing to share their shame with me. So although I'm not happy about this in any way, every single year, a handful of my female students will come to me and say, I just had my first period. Now, I'm an elementary school teacher. There are women everywhere in my school. Everywhere you look, there is a female teacher. And so when they come to me and they say, I just had my first period, my first thought is, why didn't you just tell that lady right there or that lady right there? My second thought is, I don't actually use the products you require, so although I philosophically understand them, I'm really not the person to help you at this point. But I always get them the help they need. But the reason they tell me when there's so many other options is because they know me, because I share my stories with them. The year that I told my students about the time I was homeless in my life, when I was living in my car and didn't ever think I'd get off the streets, that was the year a young lady came to me and told me that over the summer her mother had been living in the car with her, and she was afraid she might end up in the car again and then she'd be kicked out of school, and she was carrying that burden with her. Every year I tell my students about the time I spent in jail, not prison, jail, and every year I have a student who comes up to me and tells me that their uncle, their father, their mother, their aunt, their sister are in prison, and they didn't think they could ever talk about it at school because no one would understand. Every time I share something of myself with people, whether it's 10-year-old kids or audiences like you, I connect with people in deep and profound ways. That's why I want you to tell stories. I think that we move through our lives feeling a lot of shame and embarrassment for things that we have done that we don't need to feel anymore. I think we are burdened sometimes by failures that we consider so unfortunate and awful that we could never speak of them. The problem is that not enough people are speaking about their own failures and their own misfortunes and their own shames. And when people do it, when you're brave enough to do it, when you're willing to be vulnerable on a stage, or in a small group, or in a classroom, or in a coffee shop, or in the car driving somewhere with someone, when you're willing to do those things, it makes it easier for everyone else. I'm not special because a woman came up and told me she had kleptomania. I'm not special because a boy came up to me and told me he pees on the floor. None of those things happen because I'm an extraordinary storyteller. They happen because I'm willing to speak about my life in an honest and vulnerable way. And you can do that too. The problem is that so often in life we don't think we have stories. So many people think they're special because they're storyless. And I always tell people, you're not special, you're just like everyone else. We all have stories to tell. When I started storytelling in what year was it? 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I just celebrated my 10th anniversary. When I started in storytelling, I went to the Moth in New York. It's a competitive storytelling situation. You might hear it on NPR, there's a podcast. It's people telling true stories on stages like this without notes. My friends first encouraged me to go to the Moth and tell stories. They said, you've had the worst life of anyone we know. You should go to New York and tell stories. Which is right. That's not a nice thing to say about your friends. And it's not true. I work with students for the last 23 years. I can assure you, I know many of my students who had harder roads than I ever had. But I have had one of those unusual lives. Twice in my life, I have stopped breathing and my heart has stopped beating, and paramedics have used CPR to restore my life. I was arrested, jailed, and tried for a crime I did not commit. I spent a period of my life homeless. I was the victim of a horrific robbery that left me with a lifetime of post-traumatic stress disorder, and that is honestly the tip of the iceberg that is the nonsense that has been my life. So my friend said, go to New York, tell those stories. Tell the story about the time as a child my house caught on fire and a firefighter awakened me from my bed, plucked me out of my bed, and pulled me out of my house. All of these things. They said, go to New York. And so I did. I eventually went there and I started telling those stories. And I was successful. But what I discovered really quickly was those are not the best stories to tell. I'm not going to tell you any of those stories tonight. I'm a guy who has died twice and was put on trial for a crime he didn't commit, and I'm not going to let you hear about any of it. Because the truth is, those are not the easiest stories to tell, and those aren't the stories that people want to hear. If I tell you the story about the time I went through the windshield of a car and died on the side of the road, we are not going to connect on a going through the windshield level. Unless someone in the room happens to have glass in their forehead like I still have, you are not going to understand that experience and not going to feel any more connected to me. You might be entertained, you might be wowed by the story, but unless I can find something to connect with you, a universal sentiment, that story's not going to mean a lot. Now, there's ways to do it. We're not going to talk about that tonight. But what I'm going to talk about is the more important stories that I want you to tell. The little stories. Stories about spoons. That story might have seemed like a big deal to you, but honestly, a kid found a spoon in some leaves, and his dad put it on a chain, and he started dropping it on kids' necks to make them feel good, and now I do the same. That's essentially what that story is. Put a little craft, a little art into it, it can become a little more, but that's really what it is. It's a simple story. What I discovered is that we're filled with simple stories. You have more than you could ever imagine. I'm going to give you a way tonight to find those simple stories. I'm going to give you a homework assignment. I call it homework for life. If you start doing it tonight, and you should, you will do it for the rest of your life. I have been doing it for 8 years now. And thousands of people around the world, no exaggeration, are doing it with me. And there has never been a person who does homework for life who has reported that it does not work. It works for everyone. The only people it doesn't work for are the terrible human beings who don't do my homework assignment. So I'm going to give you a homework assignment. It's a simple one. I gave it to myself first. I was telling stories on stages around the world, and I realized that my list of stories was getting a little low. And I didn't want to become one of those storytellers, there's many of them, who sort of have like 12 good stories, and on any given night they'll roll one of them out. And eventually you hear all of them 14 times. I didn't want to be that person. Every time I took a stage in front of a new audience, I wanted to have a new story for them. So I decided on this homework assignment. I said at the end of every day, this is what I want you to do. At the end of every day, before I go to bed, I'm going to reflect upon my day, and I'm going to ask myself, what is the most story-worthy moment of my day? Which is to say, what is the moment from this day that is the one I would tell a story about if forced to tell a story? The way I actually think about it is this. If someone kidnapped my wife and children, And they said, you don't get them back until you tell an entertaining story about something that happened on this day. What would you tell? And I think through my day, and I find the moment, even on the most ordinary day, where there is at least something that is slightly less than ordinary. And I write it down. Now, I don't write the whole thing down. That's insanity. Those are called journalers. Those are people who take out their diaries often after someone has broken up with them, and they feverishly write for months until they find love again, and when they find love again, the journal goes back in the drawer. That is not a useful bit of storytelling. What I did was I took a spreadsheet, a simple Excel spreadsheet, 2 columns. In the left column, I've got the date, and I stretch that right column out across the screen, and that's where I write my story. I don't give myself more than 4 or 5 sentences at most to write down the story from the day. My goal was 1 new story a month, 12 new stories per year. That would have been amazing. What happens instead is kind of extraordinary, and not just for me, for everyone who does it. I discover that my life is filled with stories. I discover that my life is filled with moments throughout my day where people say something to me that moves me, or I think about something that I've never thought about before, or I do something that I'm surprised that I do, or I can't figure out why I do. These are all moments that enter my homework for life. Not all of them get told up here on stage. About 10% of the items that end up in my homework for life qualify as I might tell a story about them someday. But what happens is I never lose a day now. Even if you never plan to tell a story in your life, even if you decide tonight you will never speak again for the rest of your life, which would be weird, but you could. Homework for life will allow you to slow down your days and never lose a day. We go through our lives thinking, I can't believe how fast that week went by. My gosh, September just disappeared on me. I can't even remember what I did last Thursday. None of that happens for me. When you do homework for life, you reflect enough on each day, and you take a moment to actually record a moment from the day, and suddenly time slows down. Suddenly you have a record of the moment that the earth rotated and you were on it. And once you have a long enough list, it's amazing. One of my favorite things to do is to get on a plane flying somewhere. I open up my homework for life for a certain year. I'll open up to 2016, and I'll read my homework for life for 2016, and it's like reliving the year, bit by bit. Every single moment comes back to me. Let's play a game. This is going to be a mean game, but we're going to play it. Okay, take your age, whatever it is. You're a little younger than my usual crowd, but take your age, and let's subtract 6. I usually do a bigger number, but you're young. Subtract 6. So for me, subtracting 6, that's 44. Now think about that year of your life, whatever that number is that's yours. How much do you remember from that year of your life? How many days of the 365 that you went around the sun can you tell me something about? The older you get, the more you will forget. Ask this question to a 50-year-old and I can make them cry. Because people realize that they can go around the sun for a full year and have not a single memory of that year. It's not because they didn't live a fulfilling life. It's not because that year wasn't filled with things. The problem in our lives is that things happen to us, and sometimes we're lucky enough to notice them. Oftentimes we're not. But even when we notice them, we toss them away like they're nothing. We throw away our memories like they're meaningless, and then we bend over and pick a quarter up off the street like it's worth something. And that's just foolish. Parents all the time will say, you're not going to believe what my kid said. I got to write that down. How many parents actually write anything down? Suddenly their kid is 18. They're graduating from high school, and I say, because I'm terrible, I say, what were the 25 most memorable moments of the last 18 years? And you watch them struggle after number 8. The most important person in their world is in a cap and gown, and they're trying to find the 9th most significant moment of that kid's life. It's not because they're bad parents. It's because they don't recognize the power of story. They're not collecting their memories like they're worth something. The other thing that will happen if you begin doing homework for life is this crazy thing that I never expected. You're going to crack open, and memories from the past, things you can't believe you forgot, will suddenly start spilling out. And I add them into my homework for life too. So one of my favorite homework for life entries that happened a few years ago, it reads something like, 2 a.m., Kaylee, underwear, birds. I think that's all it says. And what happened that night was my dog Kaylee, Lhasa Apso, scratches my bed at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I look at her, and she gives me that look. If you own a dog, you know what I mean. They can look at you and they can say a sentence in their look. And her sentence is, I have to pee. And my look is, are you kidding me? It's 2 o'clock in the morning. You don't pee at 2 o'clock in the morning. And her look back at me says, don't be a jerk, I have to pee. So I have to make a decision. I'm lying in bed, I've got a pair of boxer shorts on. They're silk boxer shorts with hearts all over them, given to me by my mother-in-law on Valentine's Day. A little weird, but they're lovely. I have to decide, am I going to get dressed, or am I just going to bring my dog out to pee? Kaylee is a quick peer, she does not mess around. I live on a street with only like 12 houses, and I know all my neighbors, and they're all definitely asleep at 2 o'clock in the morning. And it's warm out. So I decide I'm going to go out in my boxer shorts, and she's going to pee on the lawn. And so we go outside, and she does. She pees on the lawn. I go to scoop her up, and she starts walking. She wants to walk to the end of the street, which is unusual because she doesn't walk very much anymore. She's old. The street is not that far away, though. There's a stop sign. It's like 4 houses away. Again, a decision. I don't even have shoes on. Do I walk to the end of the street with my dog in my boxer shorts? I love my dog. I believe in spoiling my dog because my dog does not need to grow up and have a job someday. So I say, fine, we'll go to the end of the street, and we do. In my boxer shorts, I walk to the end of the street. We get to the end, I turn to go back, and she pulls. She wants to go around the block at 2 in the morning. Now, the next street is also a street that no one will be on at 2 o'clock in the morning, no problem. But that next corner, the street that's running parallel to mine, that's Main Street in Newington, Connecticut. There will be cars on Main Street in Newington, Connecticut, even at 2 o'clock in the morning, and all I have on is boxers. I do know that sometimes guys run around with shorts and no shirt. I realize I don't look like those people. But maybe if someone drives by, they'll theoretically think I'm trying to look like those people. I decide I'm going to do it. Fine, we'll walk. It's a weird night. There's no stars in the sky. There's no moon. The birds are loud. And we're walking down the street in my underwear. I turn onto Main Street in Newington, Connecticut. I'm as far away from my house as I can be when it's that moment when it wasn't raining a second ago, and now all the rain that could possibly fall is falling instantly, which is why there's no stars in the sky and why the birds are so loud, and maybe even why Kaylee wanted to walk, because she used to love to run in the rain with me. Now here's what happens. If I'm not doing homework for life, if I haven't developed this lens for storytelling that I have now, that everyone else who does it has, I scoop Kaylee up, I walk home, I probably take a shower, go to bed, and I forget about it 3 months later because that's how we live our lives. But because I'm doing homework for life, I'm in tune to storytelling. I look at my dog and I think, she's 18 years old. And I know she doesn't have a lot of time left. The truth is, every morning I wake up and I look at her dog bed, and the first thing I do is check to see if she's breathing. She's so old. And we used to run in the rain all the time. We haven't run in the rain in a long, long time. And it occurs to me in my underwear on Main Street in the rain that this could be the last time I ever walk with my dog in the rain. My best friend. And so rather than going home, I stand in the rain in my underwear as cars go by with my dog, waiting for Kaylee to decide when it's time to go home. And while I'm standing there, that cracking open happens, that thing that I can't believe happens. The first thought that comes into my mind is the first dog I ever owned, Measelman, a dog named after the doctor who gave my father his vasectomy, Dr. Measelman, an important man in my father's life. When I'm 7 years old, my parents get divorced. My father, a cowboy, a horse trainer. I grew up on a horse farm. My father leaves. The horses go. With the horses, I lose the horse farm. I live on a land with barns and fields, but no horses. I lose my father. I really never know him again. I lose the horses. I lose my father. I get a stepfather who is not a good person. But standing on the corner that night, looking at my dog, it suddenly occurs to me that my father lost Measelman too. He lost his kids, his wife, his farm, but he lost his dog because Measelman stayed with us. And somehow, for the first time in my life, I see my father's losses through the eyes of a man rather than the eyes of a boy. And it breaks my heart for my dad. And then just as quickly, that memory is washed away, and it's a new memory. It's on the 18th green at the Walpole Country Club. I'm with a girl named Jen. We don't have any clothes on, and we're fooling around on the 18th green when the sprinklers come on, drenching us with just as much water as drenching me right now. Probably the most fun I've ever had naked outside. A memory that had been completely lost to me until I ended up practically naked in the rain on Main Street in Newington, Connecticut. Memories that were gone that are now returned from a walk with my dog in the middle of the night. Kaylee dies 2 months later. It's the last time I ever walked with her in the rain. None of that is in me today without Homework for Life. And the beauty of Homework for Life is, while I was telling you that story about Kaylee, you stopped to exist for me. And I could see my friend of 18 years as clearly as I saw her that night. I could see her right here smiling at me. So she came back for a little bit. We don't allow ourselves those opportunities because things happen and we toss them aside like they're nothing. So if you want to be a storyteller, or you just want to be a human being who values your life and the time that you will spend on this planet, you have to be a person willing to begin collecting, looking for those moments, make it a habit. You have to do it on the hardest days when there's nothing to be found, because those are the days that you work the muscle the most. You have to keep your ears open. 2 days ago, my son Charlie came up to my wife and he said, out of the blue, "Mom, I don't think you made a mistake marrying Dad." And I was like, "No kidding. Who said it was a mistake?" And then he turned to me and he said, "Dad, I don't think you made a mistake either. It's in my Homework for Life." I promise you, if I wasn't doing Homework for Life, I wouldn't remember that today. That is how we live. But now Charlie's words, I'll use them on his wedding day. I will have them forever. Homework for Life will find you the small stories that I want you to tell. The little stories that will connect to people. The Kaylee stories, where I just take my dog for a walk in the rain. That's all it is. It means so much to me, and I think it means something to you now too. If you don't choose to do Homework for Life, it's fine. There's a lot of terrible people in the world, and you can just join the crowd of terrible people. It's perfectly fine. But here's what I want you to do. If you don't do Homework for Life every single night, like brushing your teeth, it should be that much of a habit. If you don't, as you put your head on the bed tonight, I just want you to know that there are far better people in the world than you. And they're doing something that's going to change their lives in deep and significant ways. And if you're young, you're so lucky, because I didn't start Homework for Life till I was 42. The last 8 years have been remarkable. If you are young, just imagine how much you will capture. Just imagine if your great-great-grandmother was doing Homework for Life. Pen and paper, every night she wrote 3 sentences about her life. That would probably be the most valuable thing your family had today. Your house catches on fire, you grab your pets and your children, or maybe your children and your pets, and then you grab Grandma's Homework for Life, because you'd love to know what her life was like. Wouldn't you love to know what your life was like in 20 years? Because in 20 years, if you're not doing homework for life, I promise you, you're not going to remember. Ask any adult in this room how much they remember when they were your age. Tragically little. So start doing it tonight. And do it every single night for the rest of your life. You will not be unhappy about it. And you'll also become a person who has an enormous number of stories to tell. So I'm going to tell you another story. I'm going to check the time. I knew you were good for something. I'm going to tell you one more story, and then I'll give you a couple hints on how to tell stories. And then we'll say goodnight. I'll tell you one more. I'm walking across an empty parking lot on an early Sunday morning. There's this building in front of me. It's this awful edifice of a building. It's this like poured concrete. It's brutalist architecture from the 1970s. It is a symbol to me that everyone in the 1970s hated themselves and everything about the world because they make ugly things in the 70s like this building. And I hate this building, not because of the way it looks though, because of what happens inside this building. Somewhere up an elevator, down a hallway on the 3rd floor, in a small room right now, there's a person sticking a needle into the arm of another person, doing a blood draw. A simple blood draw happens all the time. And I am terrified. I am terrified of what I have to do on this day. Usually when I go for a blood draw, my wife is with me, Alicia. She would be holding my hand, we'd be walking in together, and through the whole process, she would hold my hand and whisper that everything's going to be okay. But we have a child now. Her name is Clara, and she's 1 year old. And so to wake up your wife on a Saturday morning at 7 and say, hey, honey, can you get out of bed because I have a blood draw? And then to get the baby out of the crib and get the baby dressed and for my wife to get dressed and for all of us to pile in the car to drive half a mile down the street for something that is a simple medical procedure. I asked my wife on this day to do it and she said no. Which is fine. I have come to understand that she loves our daughter more than she loves me. It's probably the way it's supposed to be. I'm not happy about it, but it is life. Prior to Alicia being in my life, what I would do is when I went into these places, I would tell the nurse or the doctor or the phlebotomist, I'd say, could you have another person come in? I need someone to hold my hand. And for a long time they would do that, but the last time I went, it was for a flu shot. I said, can you have someone come in and hold my hand? And the nurse said, you're a grown-ass man with a kid now. We're not going to hold your hand. She said, you need to be tough. And I said, I am tough. Like in the winter, I don't wear winter coats. All I wear is a hoodie and mittens, and I am fine. When I was a kid, I used to win every fight I was ever in, not because I was the best fighter, but because you can punch me in the face as many times as you want, and I just keep getting up until I can kill you. And every morning when I need to get the waffle out of the toaster oven, there are wooden tongs I could use, but I just reach my hand in and take that waffle right out. I'm a tough guy. But this is something different. So I'm walking in alone, and I don't feel good about it. I enter the doors, I reach the elevators, I press the button, the carriage of death descends to me. As I climb into the elevator and I start heading up, I think back on the last time that I really had a real problem with a blood draw. It was at Sloan Kettering. I had a student who was battling cancer, and she needed platelets. And so I agreed to donate because I'm an amazing person. So I went to New York, and platelets are worse because it's 2 needles, 1 in each arm. They basically like suck everything out of you and then put it back in. And so I went through the whole procedure, and when I was done, I was in that little room eating a cookie and drinking juice with my wife. And the nurse came in, and she said to my wife, she said, I've been doing this for 30 years, and your husband is the worst patient I have ever had. So this is a thing for me. The doors to the elevator open, I walk down the hallway, I come into this room. It's filled with these people waiting for a blood draw. They're all acting like it's nothing. They're reading People magazine and Highlights magazine. No one seems nervous. I am terrified. I put my name on the list and I wait for my name to be called. Eventually a young man opens the door and he says my name. And I stand up and I follow him into that room. I sit down in the chair, and as he starts to open up those plastic bags with the things he's going to need, I give him the speech that I give everybody when this happens. I say, listen, I have to apologize ahead of time. This is not going to be easy for me, so it's probably not going to be easier for you. I'm just really sorry about what's going to happen here. I'm not very good at this. And this man stops everything that he's doing. He sits down on a rolling stool. He comes right up to me. He puts his hands on my thighs. He looks at me and says, why is this hard for you? It's the first time anyone has ever asked me this question. And so I tell him that when I was 12, I was stung by a bee. I was allergic to the bee, but I had no idea. It was the 1980s. No one was allergic to anything. We all ate gluten-packed bread, manufactured in asbestos factories, and we just walked through secondhand smoke like it was nothing. So when I got stung by a bee, I was home alone. And I blew up like a balloon, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. I called my mother, who was in the hospital having back surgery. And I said, Mom, I can't breathe. And she said, hang up and call 911. But by that time, I was on the ground, and I couldn't get up to put the phone back on the hook to get a dial tone. And so my mother had the woman in the bed next to her call 911, while my mother heard me stop breathing. And then she heard the paramedics break down the door and administer CPR to me. And when I woke up in the hospital, I was jabbed with needles. And for the next week, as that venom continued to surge through my body, every night I would have another reaction, and I have to be rushed to the hospital and get more shots. And then eventually I had to learn to give myself shots. Prior to an auto-injector, a real needle with real sterilized water, I'd have to do it all the time so I was ready if I ever got stung. I tell this man that story. And he says to me, that's called a negative feedback loop. He says, it totally makes sense why you're afraid of needles. And then he touches the spot on his chin. There's a tiny white line that I had never noticed. He says, when I was a boy, I was at my friend's house. And for reasons we'll never understand, the dog bit me in the face. And I had to be rushed to the hospital. And he said, ever since then, I'm terrified of dogs. When I go to my friends' houses and they have dogs, they have to put the dogs either outside or in another room, or I can never feel comfortable. He says, I understand what you're going through. We'll do this together. It's the best blood draw I've ever had in my life. I get into my car and I cry. And so now, when I take my students camping every fall, as we used to before the pandemic, and a little girl tells me she's afraid of the dark, I don't shoo her away anymore. I tell her I understand how awful fear is, and we can do this together. And when a student like Mackenzie tells me that she's afraid to take a math test because she's afraid of not being perfect, I don't laugh at them anymore. I tell Mackenzie that it's going to be okay. I understand what it's like to be afraid. Let's do this together. And when my peanut allergic daughter, Clara, tells me she's afraid to try a new food because we have bathed everything in America in peanuts and peanut dust, I tell her I understand, that I know how hard fear is, and that we'll do this together. Thank you. So I like that story in situations like this because it's a story about a story, right? The only reason that I had the best blood draw of my life, and truly, although they're still rough, I have one coming up. I always know when I have one coming up. They're much better than they ever were because of that man. And it's because he told me a story. It's because he made a connection to me. He asked me for my story, and then he told me his story. And that's all it was. He wasn't a magician. His needlework wasn't better than anyone else's. He did nothing that day that any other doctor, nurse, or phlebotomist has ever done for me, except he asked for my story and he told me a story. And suddenly, the fear that I was feeling was almost gone completely. And he's made every single time I get stuck with a needle a little easier because of it. Just by being willing to listen and being willing to share. That's why we have to tell stories. So let me give you a couple little tips on storytelling as you move forward. You're going to collect your homework for life. You're going to find these amazing moments that you haven't been seeing. It'll take a little time. Be nice to yourself. Okay, don't expect after a week to have amazing stories. It's going to take a while to develop that lens, to be able to see the things that I can see and so many other people can see. It takes time. But eventually you're going to have homework for life filled with stories and you're going to wonder what to do with them. So I'm going to give you just a couple things to think about. First, you need to understand what a story is in order to be able to tell a story. The problem is most people sort of don't understand really what a story is. They tend to think it's, I'm going to report on my life. I'm going to tell you some stuff that happened over the course of a certain period of time, and that's a story. It's not. The problem in our lives is we tell most of the stories that we tell to people who love us, our friends and our family. So when we tell bad stories, boring, unentertaining, unmeaningful, stupid, because the people we're talking to love us, they smile, they nod, they say, tell me more. Not because you're a good storyteller, but because they love you. And so you get bad feedback on storytelling all the time. To be able to figure out if you tell a really good story, you actually have to stand in front of people who don't care about you. You don't care about me. These are the kinds of audiences you need to stand in front of to know whether you're doing a good job. So storytelling is not reporting on your life. Storytelling is about change. At its heart, it is always about change. Whether you're reading a book, watching a movie, watching a television show, or hearing someone like me tell you a story, it is always about change. It is one of two things. It is transformation. I used to be one kind of person, and then some stuff happened, that's the story, and at the end, I was a different kind of person. Or, probably more common, realization. I used to think one thing, and then some stuff happened over the course of time, and now I think something different. That is what a story is. It's a story whether it's a movie, a book, a television show, or what you see here. Every story that's worth hearing, and just about every story that's told in an artful way, is about change over time. So when we do our homework for life, when we're looking for stories, what we're looking for is those moments when we go, oh, I see the world differently. Something has changed for me. It used to be that I thought that this was just a kitchen spoon that I wanted to rip off the neck of a kid because he had it and I didn't. And then some stuff happened. And then suddenly I realized that this is not just a spoon. This is a magical tool to help children feel better about their lives. Right? I used to be someone who was terrified to his core to have a needle stuck in his arm. And then some stuff happened. And in the end, I'm not quite as terrified as I used to be. That's what storytelling is. So what we're looking for is those moments at the end, really. We're looking for those moments of change, those moments where, wow, I see something different, right? We're looking for those moments where I'm not quite sure, but I think I see the world in a new way right now. Some of them are not stories. The moment where Charlie, for example, tells me, Mom, or tells my wife, Mom, I don't think you made a bad choice selecting Dad, right? There's no transformation in that, right? That's a moment. It's entertaining, it's funny, maybe it'll be a story someday. Maybe if Charlie starts trying to break me and Alicia up, that becomes part of a significant story, right? Maybe if tomorrow my wife leaves me, now it's part of the story. But right now it's just a little moment. Nothing changed in my heart and mind, so it's not really a story. I'm looking for the moments where something changes, just a little bit. It's often we see the world in a different way, we see ourselves in a different way. Someone has said something to us that has made us reconsider our ideas, our thoughts, our feelings about ourselves. I promise you, they happen all the time. You just aren't in tune to them. But when you find them, it's usually the end of the story. Right? I didn't know I had a story until that man made my blood draw the best that it's ever been. Actually, the moment I really knew I had a story was when I was crying in the car. I was crying and thinking, well, this is going to be a story, right? And then I just asked myself, well, what happened? I had the best blood draw of my life. Wow. And then to find the beginning of my story, I just said, well, what's the opposite of that? Well, I'm going to have the worst blood draw of my life. Oh, that's an easy story to tell. I thought it was going to be the worst, and it ended up being the best, right? I knew I had a Jamie story the year of the pandemic. I was using this spoon all the time, and I said to myself, well, this is going to be a story because this kid is feeling better now because of this damn spoon, right? And I said, what's the opposite of this spoon having actual magic? I said, oh, it's the moment Jamie found it in the leaves, and I didn't think it was magical. It was just something he had, so I wanted because I'm a jerk, right? That's how stories work, though, right? Start paying attention to the way movies work. If you pay attention to the first 15 minutes of any movie, you're pretty much going to know how that movie ends. Doesn't mean it's going to spoil it for you, but you will know. Also, if you're married, your wife will tell you you're not allowed to talk during movies anymore because she doesn't want the ending spoiled. But that's how stories work. I like to think that the beginning and ends of stories have to be in conversation with each other. We have to feel like we've gone someplace. We have to feel like something significant has changed, and it's in that change that you will connect with other human beings. If I just told you the story about the blood draw, and I didn't talk about how I felt and how my life changed as a result, if it was just the events, it wouldn't mean very much to you. But perhaps you are frightened about something also, like I was. Perhaps you're not as frightened anymore. Perhaps you're still frightened and you're wishing you would meet a man like I did. But either way, if you've ever had a fear, I suspect you are a little more connected to me now than you were a minute ago. Right? If you've ever suffered through some situation and you have an item in your life that makes you feel better, you have your grandmother's ring or your lucky pen or the backpack that sits on your back and lets you know you have all your stuff with you, whatever it is, if you have a thing like this, or you've ever wanted a thing like this, then you can connect with me on my story. If you have a dog, I know you feel more connected with me now than you did before. Right? Bulldog? It's in the change that we connect with people, not in the events. Your extraordinary drinking story is just a drinking story. Your amazing car accident avoided story is just an amazing avoiding of a car accident. We're looking for stories in hearts and minds. Those are the ones that will connect to people. And the one other tip I'm going to give you, and it's a simple one. It's habit forming, and I want you to do it every time you tell a story. I want you to think about 2 words when you tell a story. Just 2. I want you to say to yourself, location and action. Location and action. Start every story that you tell with location and action. We start with location because location has incredible powers, more than any other element of a story, because locations become imbued with thousands of adjectives. I use this example in a class today. Let's play it here. I'm going to start a story for you. I'm standing in the kitchen and I drop the bowl of strawberries onto the floor. Standing in the kitchen and I drop the bowl of strawberries onto the floor. Can you see the kitchen? I didn't describe the kitchen in any way. But you can tell me if the floor is wooden, tile, or linoleum. You can tell me if the appliances in the kitchen are laminate or stainless steel. You can tell me probably what's in the refrigerator if I open the door. You can tell me if you are one of those strange people who puts the trash under the sink, or you're a reasonable and rational human being who keeps the trash outside somewhere in the kitchen where people can see it. That bowl, was it wooden, glass, or plastic? You know. And if the layout of the kitchen is immaterial to the story, I want you to use your kitchen. It's probably your own kitchen or your parents' kitchen or a kitchen you've seen on a TV show that you love. I want you to use that one, because that will feel so real to you. And I won't have to waste words describing it. And that bowl, if it doesn't matter what it's made of, I want you to use your bowl. Because the power of your imagination will always be more powerful than the words I have to offer you. So location creates a scene instantly in the audience's mind. I'm walking across an empty parking lot on a Saturday morning. I'm standing behind my school staring at a pile of leaves while doing recess. I'm laying in my bed when my dog scratches on the bed. You saw me in all of those places with location. And then we start with action because people want you to start the damn story. Do not start your story by saying, I grew up in a one-horse town with a single traffic light. There was a candy store on the corner. There was a pharmacy down the street. There was a river that ran through my town, and on fall days you could smell the river wherever you were. Nobody cares about any of that if you haven't started your story. Those are people that you should stay away from at all costs. All of those things might actually be relevant to the story you're about to tell, but start the story before you tell us by having action. Do something. When people hear a story, what they want to know is what happened and what was said. What action took place and what words were spoken. They don't care about the quality of green on the wallpaper in the kitchen. They do not care if your boyfriend's eyes are blue or brown. No one has ever cared what color eyes your temporary boyfriend's eyes are. They don't care what color it is, they never will. Action and what is being said, and lean into the power of location to provide most of the description. Allow the power of the imagination to work for you. If you just do those two things, now I've written a whole book. I could speak for, I bet, 34 hours on storytelling and not finish all of the things I would like to tell you. I've only given you a couple. Beginnings and ends, being in conversation with each other, action and location. Just do those two things and you'll be better than almost everyone in the world who tells stories today. Because most people don't think before they speak. Something happens and they just start talking about it. What I'm asking you to do is to pause 10 seconds and think, what just happened to me? What did it do to me? Action and location. And you'll be the kind of person who can tell stories in small groups, in large groups, in classrooms, at holidays. And when you're finished telling that story, people will feel more connected with you. People will come up and share things with you, sometimes that you don't want to hear. But you will help them. You'll help the world. You'll help people feel a little less shame, a little less embarrassment. Their failures will feel a little lighter after you have spoken. And you will have people who want to spend time with you more than you've ever had before. I promise you that. So your job tonight is to first go home and do your homework for life. And never miss a night. Never miss a night for the rest of your life. Hold on to the stories, find them, and then find people who want to hear them. They're out there, I promise. Be a good listener of stories, be a good teller of stories, but most importantly, be a collector of your own stories. As this earth turns and as we go around the sun, do not allow another rotation or revolution of this planet to go by without you holding on to at least one thing from every day for the rest of your life. Please. Thank you very much. You've been a wonderful audience.
In my mouth. Oh God. We wanted to leave some time for any questions you all may have for Matthew. It is 7:09, so I realize it's a little late. If we can go to 7:20, is that okay?
I'll be here all night.
Does anyone have any questions?
That spoon is 12 years old. Why is it so tiny? It's really a good question. I mean, it's magic. I mean, the answer's pretty obvious. I don't know why it's so shiny, actually. I mean, it's in the lights. I think if you came up close, it is kind of shiny, though. It's older than 12 years, possibly. It probably is. I don't think the kid got the spoon and then immediately came to school with the new spoon and lost it. So I suspect it's older than 12 years. I guess the only answer I have is it's magic, and I think it's probably catching the light rather delightfully. Would you like to touch it? You can come and touch it later. It's a weird sentence. Every time I do that, I'm always like, you gotta find a better way to say that now. Anything else? If not, that's fine. Oh, I don't see. Yellow sweat. Oh, hi. You know what? I get it. You're a very visually expressive person.
I am.
You really are. As a speaker, this is a little extra hint. If you're speaking to an audience, what you really want to do is you want to find the visually expressive people in the audience, and you hone in on those people, right? And then you're like, so like there's like 3 people over there that are super visually expressive, and I was kind of speaking right to them. And then you're right in the center, and you're very visually expressive. And then over here, you're very visually expressive. You are. And so, not that I didn't give others attention. Actually, down here, you're auditorily expressive. There was a lot of like, and like, oh. And that's great. I love it. It's all good. So I know you have a question, but I just want to thank you for being it doesn't mean if you're not visually expressive that you're a bad person and that you weren't paying attention. You just don't react in a visual way. But you did, so thank you. I appreciate that. What's your question?
You stressed with the homework for life thing that keeping the entries short, just using keywords and limiting it to a few sentences. I guess my concern with that is losing aspects of those memories.
Yeah. So the question was, am I worried about losing parts of my memory by not recording enough on my homework for life? So a couple things. Well, let's just call it homework for life, not the homework for life thing. Homework for life. I've actually trademarked the term. I have. I did it for the academic process of learning how to do it, but now I get to say that, which is even better. It's true. So, the example I gave you was very brief because I knew I would never forget it, but there are like 4 or 5 complete sentences. You don't need to do this. Ever since 2003, I have written a blog post every single day of my life. So it's 6,200 days in a row where I've written something. I've actually written every single day of my life since I was 17, but not on a blog. But what I do is, if I find a really significant moment that I'm worried, like, there's a lot of rich details here that I don't want to forget, I'll either actually write the story later, or I'll take my phone and record it, and I'll say as much as I can. The reason I want it to be short is frankly because people are lazy and dumb. And because of that, if I ask them to do too much, they won't do anything at all. So I want it to be as long as it takes you to brush your teeth, because I think everyone brushes their teeth every night. If not, come talk to me later. We have more to talk about. So I want it to be short so that even on your hardest day, you're not demanding anything of yourself. And I have those days too, where I barely have a moment, so I'm so happy that it's nice and brief. But when I do have a really good moment, I'll record it or I'll write it later on. But I want that to be separate from Homework for Life. I want you to trust yourself that if you found a moment, you can hold on to it. The other thing I have more things I could tell you about Homework for Life. There's a TED Talk actually on it. If you just Google Homework for Life, you'll find my TED Talk on the topic. What I do is I allow 100 entries to go by, and I shift over to a new spreadsheet. And then I allow 100 entries to go by, and I shift over to another spreadsheet. Now, many times I have more than one item on a day, so that's not really 100 days. It ends up being like 70 or 80 days. But then what I do is I go back after a couple hundred days to check if my memory is okay. And that's my final, okay, I'm 200 entries away. I'm going to go look at my 100 entries and see if everything is still there. And if I feel like, I might lose that one, I'll add some detail to it, or I'll go write about it. So I'm always reflecting back on my life, which is also a lot of fun. You also discover that you're in the middle of stories that you didn't realize you were in the middle of, which is really extraordinary. Back in May, one of my Homework for Life entries on one of my very boring days was, the neighbors on the left of me and the neighbors on the right of me and my wife and I all gathered at our patio for the first picnic of the summer, our first cookout, and it was so great. I love having such wonderful neighbors. Boring entry, right? 2 months later, the neighbors on the left of me are suddenly getting a divorce, and the neighbors on the right of me are suddenly getting a divorce, and it suddenly occurs to me that on the deck that night, the only happy couple was me and my wife. Everyone else was fighting and pretending that they were happy, right? So suddenly that May entry that meant nothing to me in May, like boring entry, this is the best I got, now it's the beginning of a story. It's the beginning of how all the couples on my street are breaking up because of the pandemic, and somehow my wife and I have managed to hold on despite all of that. So a lot of times you don't realize what you're in the middle of unless you're doing homework for life. So you're always going back, you're always refreshing, and you're always looking to make sure those memories hold on. That's a great question. And thank you for your visual expressiveness. Yes?
So you mentioned that you've done a blog for many, many years and also been writing every day since you were 17. What makes homework for life qualitatively different from doing those two?
So when I write a blog post every day, sometimes it's just Donald Trump is a terrible person and here's why. That's not really about my life, right? I sued him and won. I was one of those people who he blocked on Twitter and I ended up suing him and won. So I have issues with the man. But a lot of times my blog posts are really like, I am reacting to something that I've read, I'm reacting to something I've seen, but I'm not recording my life. If you read my blog every day, you're not going to get a snippet of my life every day. A lot of times you'll get a snippet of like yesterday's blog post and my homework for life moment, they were the same. I came home and my son is writing a newsletter for our neighborhood. He writes newsletters for them. And when I came home, he was working on the newsletter, and Clara, my daughter, was asking if she could run an ad in the newsletter for her mother's helper services. And then they began negotiating the price and the size of the ad. My 9-year-old son was going, well, a medium-sized ad will cost you $1, a large-sized ad will cost you $2, and the placement, of course, on the paper will, vary the price too, depending on where. And then at one point she said, I'll take the $1, but can you include that I'm fully vaccinated because that will help sales? And he says, yes, I think that will drive sales. And I'm like, these kids are 9 and 12. What the hell is going on in my house? So that was my blog entry, which is lovely, but really not about me. It is in my homework for life. But a lot of times my blog entries are about people other than me too. I might write about someone else. So that's how they're different. Sometimes they're the same though. Sometimes if you were privy to my homework for life, you'd discover, oh, it happened. And then 3 days later, he wrote about it on his blog. But many, many times it's not, because I'm just reacting to the world in other ways too. Does that help? You're a person who laughs a lot. I appreciated that too. Thank you very much. I notice. I have time up here to notice things. Anyone else?
Yeah, right here.
Oh, yeah. Hi.
How do you stay motivated to keep doing your homework for life?
Well, nowadays I stay motivated because I can't imagine losing a day. All I have to do is look back and see 2015 and go, why would I ever want to lose 2021? Because 2015, I'm so glad I have every moment of that time. What I just sort of have convinced myself of, and I want to convince you of, is that every single time this earth rotates, something happened in your life that's worth mentioning. And it can be really small. And you never know if it's going to stay small or be big. That May day really convinced me that even the boring entries are worth writing down. Because if all I can write is I had a nice moment on a patio with 2 other couples, that's the best I got. If people kidnapped my family, that's the story I'm going to tell. Well, I had a lovely dinner with the 2 neighbors, right? But it ends up being really important to me because these people that I love are actually in great discord. And I had no idea that night. And so suddenly, something that seems insignificant becomes significant. So I keep my motivation up by trusting that my life is worth taking note of, that people beyond my life, my children and their children and their children's children, this is going to be a valuable thing for them someday. When I'm gone, they know about homework for life. They know it exists. And when I'm gone, they can know all the secrets. They can know all the things I said and thought. I don't care. It's going to have enormous value for them as well. So I'm always thinking about the future. And I'm just always trusting that the things I'm writing down will have value for me in the future. You do it for a while. Do it for 60 days and you'll never turn back. It's hard to judge the value of brushing your teeth, right? Until you go to the dentist and they tell you 3 have to come out. But you do it. You do it on faith. You do it on faith that this is the right thing to do, so it's the right thing to do. Yeah, I know that's not a great answer. I wish I could say, here's a pill. Take this pill and you'll be motivated forever. All I have is a quarter. I have a dice. Here's a 10-sided dice. Okay? Every time you don't feel motivated, look at the dice and know that if you don't do it, you're a terrible person. Because I gave you a 10-sided dice. I mean, put it somewhere where you see it and you'll know forever. I don't have another 10-sided dice, so if you're asking for that, all I can give you now is a quarter. Actually, the quarters I have, it's the 4 quarters that Clara paid Charlie yesterday for the ad. He never puts anything away, and she never puts anything away, so I took the quarters this morning and said they're not getting them back until I start putting their shoes away. So that's why I have 4 quarters in my pocket. Yes?
Have you ever done storytelling in terms of marketing or selling a product?
All the time. I work with very large companies, working with their marketing teams, their sales teams. I work with lots of CEOs on speeches that they're going to deliver. So I do lots and lots of that work. In what relationship do I put the product to the story? It's a good question. I guess what I'm always helping them with is how to present their message in a story-like fashion. So what I've discovered is in corporate world, they desperately want to, they say they want to like do storytelling all the time to me. They say, we want to do storytelling, we want to be different and bold. And then instead they want to be round, white, and vanilla, because that's safe. Most of the time they speak things and then half an hour later they can't even remember what they said. So what I try to do for them is I try to bring in the elements of storytelling like suspense and wonder and surprise and humor and characterization and location. I try to bring all of those things into the story that they're going to tell in their marketing. One of my favorite examples was a woman at a very large tech company that you interact with probably frequently. She came up with this brilliant new marketing pitch. It was really fantastic. She had a real breakthrough. Her breakthrough happened on a Tuesday night. She was drinking a glass of wine by herself. It came to her, she wrote it on a napkin. When it came time to actually put the deck together to prepare the marketing pitch, I said, you have to include the moment with the napkin and the wine and the Tuesday night. And she said, I don't need that. And everyone in the company said, she don't need that. And so it came out. It was fine. And then one day she got to pitch that same deck to a smaller audience, and I convinced her to put in the Tuesday night and the wine and a picture of that napkin. And when she put that in, she said the reaction was extraordinary. She said she finished and people actually came up and wanted to talk to her. Because people understand about wine at 2 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock at night and a sudden inspiration. Like, you understand that. You've had those moments. That is storytelling. That is, she said something authentic and vulnerable, lonely drinking on a Tuesday night, and a sudden idea on a napkin, and suddenly people connected with her. So I try to do that for the people I work with, and I do a lot of unfortunate work with PowerPoint. But what I try to do is teach them that when you flip from one slide to the next slide, there's an opportunity for surprise or to ruin the surprise. There's an opportunity to create wonder throughout your pitch deck or to just sort of ruin it by creating nothing. And so I work with people in that regard too. I work with advertising agencies like the biggest in the world. I'll look at their car commercial and I'll do things like, what's the name of the guy driving the car? And they go, I don't know. Who cares what the guy's name is? And I say, well, if you're a storyteller, you do. It might not come in at all, but let's give him a name. And they say, like, Chet. We all know who Chet is, right? We all know who Chet is. And suddenly, like, oh, it's Chet, right? And they think, I think we need a redheaded actor for Chet. And I say, of course you do. All Chets are redheaded, right? So suddenly, like, just by giving the characters in their commercials a name, suddenly they become real people, and they're able to put in just a few little things that make this story feel more real. Even if we never know Chet's name, suddenly we know what to do with this guy to make him not just another guy driving a car, but somebody with a little bit of personality. So I do lots of crazy stuff like that. I never thought I would do any of it. I never thought this would ever happen, but people come and they've discovered it's worth their time. So thank you for the question. Yes. How and why did I start doing homework for life? Well, it was a homework assignment I gave to myself out of sheer panic that I would run out of things to say. It was. I didn't want to run out of stories. I'm a fundamentally unlikable person who tells a good story. I'm also the worst golfer ever, but I get asked to play golf all the time. Not because of the way I play, but when I shank my ball into the trees, while we're looking for it, my friends know Matt will entertain us with a good story, and therefore I get asked to play golf all the time. So it's my desperate attempt to always have something to say. If we're really getting philosophical, this came out in Brazil once in front of 900 kids. What's probably happening is I'm desperately trying to get the attention of a father who left me when I was 7 and never came back, and a mother who's now dead. I'm trying to get the attention of parents who never gave me attention before. And if I find enough stories, maybe that will happen someday. That's actually true and unfortunate, but authentic and vulnerable, which is what I want you to be. So, all right, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you, Sarah. You're the best.
Thank you everyone for being here. One last thing, if you did not sign the sign-in sheet, please come see me so that we can give you credit for being here. And once again, thank you very much, Matthew.